Join us for part 2 of things that used to be second nature, but you may have forgotten. From finding effective methods for self care when you're stressed to building community in intentional ways, grab a cup of coffee and enjoy this trip down memory lane. The world needs more camp. We're certain that you can be the one to help solve this problem. Welcome to Beyond Camp, where we explore the intersection of camp in our lives. For too long, camp professionals have referred to camp as being in a bubble. We're here to burst that bubble. We know that camp intersects with every aspect of our lives. We're excited to delve into those with you today. We are your hosts, Rachel Kent. My pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Cassie Bloy. My pronouns are also she, her.
We're here to go beyond camp with you. As a reminder, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening today, and be sure to check out the show notes at gocamp.pro/beyondcamp. Now, let's get started. So today we are following up on episode 31, where we talked about camp lessons that you might have forgotten. And Cassie and I got so into this topic and it was so well received that we thought we would dive into a part 2 of lessons that we have been remembering from camp as we enter into this next stage of our life in camp adjacent work. We'll say, I don't want to say I've left camp. But in this next stage of our lives that's more camp adjacent, and we both are moving into more management roles, we're really reflecting on the things that we learned at camp, and the importance of those, and also how often those lessons are lacking from our day-to-day lives. I think both Cassie and I, and Cassie, correct me if I'm wrong, we've had these moments where we've brought up a camp lesson or something that we've learned used to do with our staff, and folks in our lives are shocked or are amazed at how effective this is. And I know you've experienced something similar.
Yeah, or just like, oh, you know how to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Even as sometimes like the response I get of like, oh, I think you're really knowledgeable in this. And I'm like, this is kind of basic, but sure.
And it's interesting. It's because you might think that it's basic or something becomes second nature because you lived it
Yeah.
for so long.
Hmm.
And so I think as camp pros working in different fields now, we should remember those and harness those, because I think we can all agree that the world needs a little bit more camp.
Yeah.
So Cassie, I'll flip to you for our first lesson that you want to share
Yeah.
with folks.
So effective self-care. We all know that like we go on about self-care all the time, right? We're like, do your self-care. And camp professionals struggle at it, but I also think we are able to acknowledge it better and find methods of self-care that work for us in our busiest times, right? So think of when you're in the middle of summer, you're like, oh, I need to do something for me. What is it you do then? Those are the things you need to do, because it might not be what you absolutely need, but it'll be the thing that works in that moment.
Yeah, I also find it's not the thing that media would say that self-care is.
Oh yeah, that too, but
Well, like I guess I just mean, it's not often or ever, I shouldn't say not often, ever, that I've like left camp to go to a spa when I need self-care. I don't know why self-care always makes me think of that. I'm sure a spa is lovely. But sometimes it's that like 10 minutes that I found to sit and journal or sit and take a like hang out by the water with a cup of coffee, whatever it is. I feel like I got really good at like finding those little tiny things that refilled my cup just enough to get to the next point in my day.
yeah, it's the little things. And like a lot for me, it was often like being able to connect with a friend, somebody who's
Mm-hmm.
not on the same property as me. Is so important. And like even still going forward, that exists. It's like if I'm working by myself, I don't like being in the room by myself. So like I've sat and just called a friend and we've had a video call going. Neither of us are talking, but we're working.
Mm-hmm.
And just having that other presence in the same quote unquote space can be helpful sometimes, because I think at camp especially we're so used to that like other presence, other bodies near us.
Yeah, and I'm going to dive into some stuff about community in a little bit, but I think especially we're recording this sort of in the middle of January 2022. That's the right year, Rachel. Good work. I'm not the only one who's still saying the wrong year, I'm sure. But where I am right now, at least, we're still pretty, or we've moved back into being pretty locked down. Folks are working back from home. There's sort of a sense of doom in some ways, or just exhaustion. I would say maybe that sounds a little bit more optimistic or less negative. But I think that ability just to connect, to have somebody else be present in your life, is
Mhm.
overlooked self-care.
Yeah, I think so, definitely. And I can honestly say I've been missing it for the last little bit.
I love that you brought that up. That's a great one. Thanks, Cassie. So also, while we're on the topic of January and the world that we live in, mine is next lesson is goal setting. So at camp, at least the camps that I've worked at, we set a lot of regular goals, often, sometimes to the dismay of our staff. Maybe they didn't love them, but I think they started to see the value in them. And the reason for that is we really set goals that are tangible and attainable. January New Year's resolutions, and I'm not here to hate on resolutions or to talk one way or the other about them, but I think there's science behind what makes for an effective resolution or goal, because a resolution really is a fancy goal, I think, in my mind. And so at camp, we often use those SMART goals, right? So specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. And at camp, it's nice because there's like a finite season, right? So if your goal is to learn to paddle a canoe, just to be simplistic here, not that paddling a canoe is simplistic, but you have a set amount of time in which to accomplish that. Like if you're starting camp, let's say at the end of June, and you want to paddle a canoe, you have until the end of August to achieve that goal. So you're picking something that's timely, that's measurable, it makes sense. And when we look at resolutions, like that's a whole year. And so I think sometimes we pick things that we're like, yeah, we can totally change our lives in a year, which you absolutely can. But when they're not measurable and there aren't time limits around it, makes it really challenging. And so I think we need to take some of the things that we've learned about setting goals in the summer and start to apply them to our day-to-day lives.
Yeah. And I think continuing to teach them as we move, if you're still in camping or if you're not, totally cool too. But I continue to teach that skill and kind of not as directly like this is what they are, but my staff that reapply have to set 2 goals for themselves for the season. And then we dive into those a little bit further as the season progresses. And that helps us create more of a mentorship relationship and gives them more direction and purpose in their day-to-day and not just come in and kind of truck along too. So there's value in it outside of camp as well, like in just looking forward and moving out of our boxes.
Absolutely. I think also that when we're at camp, we often achieve the goals that we set, which is really unique, because I've often felt in other aspects of my life that we set goals and we never really quite get to them. We set them and we figure, set it and forget it, which is not what you want when it comes to goals. Or we set them and they just start unachievable, or we don't recognize when we've met them, possibly because we've forgotten that we've set them in the first place. But I think at camp, we're really good at celebrating the wins of achieving goals. And we need to get back to that. So remember the goal setting that you did, how you did it at camp, and think about how you can apply that to your day-to-day life. Cassie, I'll flip to you.
Yeah. So another lesson that I've been thinking a lot about lately is knowing that the skills you have as a camp director are valuable, that what you do is important anywhere you take those skills. You have to be able to trust in what you do. You know that you're making the right choice, but I know I for one, always second guess, is this the right choice? Am I making the right decision? Should I hire this person? Right? Trust in what you do. But it also comes down to communicating what you do and knowing how to speak about what you do. I find that, especially like, I'm going to go pre-pandemic. I think I've been working on this one a little bit. Don't sell yourself short, right? Like, you can do this. You have the skills and ability. Just believe in it.
Yeah. And I think often camp pros fall short of that a little bit when we're applying to camp adjacent jobs or moving to other aspects of our lives. And we've talked about this before about how to, put camp on your resume and things like that. But it does come down to trusting yourself. If you trust yourself that you did all of those things at camp, then you should be able to communicate all of those skills outside of the camp world.
Yeah. And like when I think about it and having gone through that transition to move to like camp adjacent, because it really, where I am is really, really camp adjacent, like so close, but so far at the same time. Looking at how the corporate world tracks things. And you figuring out how you at camp can do that as well. So like something that I've learned that the rest of the world uses are KPIs, key performance indicators. What are those for camp and how do we track them? Do you track them? I know I didn't. I could tell you my camper retention rate. That was an important one. Staff retention rate, percentage of heads in beds. Those are kind of the things, but how does that affect your revenue? What does that look like for staff happiness?
So now you're flipping this like lessons that we should bring to camp, which is also super valuable. I appreciate that. I think when it also comes to communicating what you do, when you stood on the camp property and somebody came up to you and said, like, what do you do here? You, in that moment, I almost guarantee, would be able to explain. You would know those KPIs off the top of your head. You might not know them by that term, but you would know that. You would absolutely be able to say, well, today I ran a staff meeting and I scheduled this and I problem solved this. And then I facilitated this situation and I negotiated with this vendor. And somebody would be like, wow, that's impressive. But then suddenly it's November and you find yourself talking to somebody and they're like, so what do you do as a camp director? And you're like, I play with children and cause chaos. Like, why have we forgotten all of the incredible things that we've done? That's very impressive and very real and very tangible. In the moment, in the summer, or whatever season your program is running in, you trusted yourself to be able to communicate that effectively. Don't lose that once you leave.
Yeah, maybe we should be like writing these down as memories for ourselves so that when we need to pull them out, we can just have like this little like cheat sheet.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to do one more lesson before we hop to our ad break, which is going to sort of build on this theme of trust. And I'm going to reference a Camp Hacker podcast that I recently got to do a little guest spot on about building trust with parents. And that's what made me think of this. Is at camp, we spend a lot of time building trust. And we know that trust doesn't come easily. We know that it doesn't come quickly, and we work really hard at it. Whether it's with parents and caregivers, where we spend hours, perfecting our materials to talk with somebody. We are willing to send those extra emails, have those extra phone calls, conversations. We know that it takes time to build trust with our staff. We even understand at camp that it takes time to build trust with ourselves, but we learn to trust ourselves. I know sometimes at camp, we often use the phrase fake it till you make it as a way to build trust in ourselves and have that confidence. And I mean, that phrase has its pros and cons to it for sure. But sometimes I think outside of camp, we forget how important trust is. And I know on our previous part one of this episode, I talked about the importance of relationships, but trust is such a key part of that I wanted to really, really zero in on it. That we need to take active steps to build that trust. Like, how do you build trust with your staff when they show up at camp? You let them know what you're doing. You're very specific about those things. You give them the information that you need. You make yourself available. How often are you doing those things with your clients now in your day-to-day life, whatever aspect of work you might be working in, or with your colleagues? Are you just hoping they'll trust you, expecting it, or are you working actively to gain that trust? And the same goes for trusting yourself, because I think that that's really key. How did you build trust in yourself at camp? Like, how did you get to the point where you're like, yep, I can run this camp and this is what I'm doing here? Think about the steps that you took for that and build those into your day-to-day life, because I think trust it's so important and so valuable. And I think that we forget that sometimes, especially in a world where we live within screens, in a world that has a fair amount of divide in it right now, I would say. So trust is key. My lesson is to actively build it the way that you do at camp.
Yeah, I love it. And I saw something recently, I don't know where it was or where it came from, but it was about not earning trust, but giving your trust to somebody instead of having them earn your trust. And I think that has a lot of value when you're working with young people. If you give them your trust, I think they're more likely to reciprocate as well. And there's the potential for better workers if they inherently know that you trust them, and you'll continue to build that level of trust instead of from ground level, from pre-existing, of like, this is where we're at, this is where we're starting. It's from up here, not from down there.
Absolutely. I love that. On that note, we're going to take a quick break here and we'll be right back to hear more lessons from Cassie.
When camp pros have inequitable access to professional development opportunities, it impacts the person seeking to increase their knowledge, as well as the children and adults they serve. ACA Illinois is committed to providing free to low-cost professional development experiences each and every year, because every child deserves to attend a camp where their director has the very best training, regardless of their camp's financial situation. Elevate your camp and career today at acail.org. All right, we are going to jump right back in here with a few more lessons before we wrap up our episode today. And for some reason, I feel like these lessons today are just a little bit more transferable than just camp lessons. So for this one, the value of learning. I think at camp, we do this so well. We continue to learn, we look for new opportunities, we seek out grants, we seek out this to help us pay for these opportunities, or we apply for scholarships. And we need to continue learning, whether that's learning about what we're doing now, where we're at. And I know, especially with camping, like the influx of information sometimes is down a little bit. I see it coming back of like, here's this opportunity, here's that, but there's not the same, like, I feel like there's something missing right now. And we need to seek out those opportunities. We need to look for them again. We need to find them. We need to share them. And I think that's the big one, the sharing of opportunities. I think we're kind of coming back into ourselves and being like, no, this is my information. I'm going to keep it so that when I'm able to go again, I have what I need and nobody else does.
I think the culture around professional development in camping is much different than other places. I don't know if you've noticed that, but I was always very fortunate that professional development, or PD, or Pro D, as I've learned some folks call it, any of the above, was a huge part of what I did when I worked in camping. And everybody just did that. Like, you would go to a conference or you would read books or whatever. And folks really fostered that in you, the same way that you foster continuous learning in your staff during the summer. And now that I'm working in sort of an adjacent field, I'm learning that there are folks who have been in their jobs for 5, 10, 15 years who've never done professional development beyond maybe a Microsoft Excel course, which is important because Microsoft Excel is very challenging for people like me. So I should add that to my professional development. But aside from that, like, I find that it's really interesting, that the culture of that in camping, and then how it doesn't exist to the same extent outside.
Yeah, it really doesn't. And the sharing, I think, is the even more that doesn't exist. And I don't want camping to lose that as we like gear back up to whatever may exist in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, my next lesson, so I do my best job, or my best thinking while I'm driving. Maybe my best job, I don't know, but I do my best thinking while I drive. And so I had a driving thought the other day. Somebody was talking to me about working in the work that they do, and they were talking about how folks in their work, they work in social services, have this like incredible sense of community. And it got me thinking about what community is. And I think at camp, we spend so much time building intentional community. So like, we're so passionate about it, and it's in every little thing that we do. When our staff arrive for training, if we're eating meals together, we're making sure that folks are switching up where they're sitting at the table. There might be icebreakers at the table. We're making sure that our senior staff are sitting with our new staff. We're making calls to our first year staff before they even show up. So before camp even starts, we've built in so much intentional community. And then throughout the summer, we continue with that, whether it's staff socials, staff appreciation, warm and fuzzies, shared songs, funny memories, jokes, etc. Community is at the heart of what camping is, in my opinion, at least. But then we leave, and how do we continue to build community? And I don't mean that just in terms of like staff retention and like keeping your alumni engaged, because that's incredibly important and certainly not my area of expertise. And there's lots of great stuff out there about that. But what I mean is, how do we build community in the rest of our lives? For example, I live with my partner and our roommate, and I was thinking about how we love homemade pizza night. And why do I love homemade pizza night? Because we come together and we are actively making dinner together. And that is community building. And we often miss these opportunities in our lives to build community because we think the community is a group of 50 people, 100 people, 1,000 people. We think that it has to be structured with people that we've hired. But I think community is found in these small moments. And I think that our society often has this idea that we need to live so independently in our little silos, our houses, our apartments, and we aren't interconnected. But when we're at camp, we're so interconnected. Somebody always knows what we're up to, what you're thinking. I mean, especially at overnight camp, you wake up in the morning and you like woke up on the wrong side of the bed or something's not going right. Somebody knows what's happening, like it or not, because there are plenty of moments where I'm like, can you please just back off? I'm clearly fine. And people are like, no, we know you, Rachel, you're not fine. A blessing and a curse. But that sense of community and being connected is so, so strong at camp because it's fostered, because we're taught to look out for one another. We're taught to be interdependent in many ways. But when we leave camp, we don't value that. And so my lesson is to take all those little intentional things you learned about building community and see where you can put those into your day-to-day life. Is it the group of people you live with? Can you make homemade pizzas together and share that time together? Is it in the way that you intentionally connect with your friends, Zoom or otherwise? Is it like bringing people together with a shared purpose? Is it taking a moment to write a note to somebody? I think that feeling of being camp sick is often a feeling of missing community and missing that connection with each other. And that can transfer into other parts of our lives so easily. And for folks who've never experienced, and I'm going to say the magic of camp, and I know that that's not the best way of describing camp, but that specialness of camp, that community and connectedness at camp, for folks who never experienced that, you'll only have to do a fraction of what you did in the summer for people to be like, wow, this is different. This makes this moment and this person incredibly special. So take what you've learned about community in the summer and see, you want to challenge folks who are listening where you can apply that into your day-to-day life and what sort of changes that will have.
Oh, there was so much truth in that. And just almost like a reality check of like, we do so much at camp to make sure this exists. What little thing can I do to continue to ensure it exists? Or what can I involve myself in to find a new community or a sense of community where I am currently?
Yeah, and it's so important, and it doesn't always take a lot. But this is why like the world needs more camp people, and I'll call it two folks who do this really well. One is Travis. Travis is great about sending a Bonjoro video or a little message, and Mark was always great at that. You go on Instagram one day and there would just be a message from him being like, hey, like, how are you doing? Like, just checking in. And like, what a beautiful thing that takes like 20 seconds to do, but what an incredible impact. Yeah, I just think it's one of those things that we know the importance of community at camp. And we could talk about it for hours and there's research on it. But why does it not become important in the dark winter months? Like why do we not have those connections?
I wish I knew the answer. And I want to pause us for a minute and be like, I'm going to cliche, put a pin in this. I think there's a full episode here that we need to talk about.
All right, great. Well, I'll
I'll
schedule another long drive for myself to wrestle with this. And that was a driver I hadn't had a lot of sleep. So maybe that's when I do my best thinking. And we'll come back to this. Great.
Yeah, I think I want to talk more about it, but I also know we have a limited time today. My goodness.
All right. Okay. Reel me in, Cassie. That's fair. So before I move on, one last thing is I challenge people to find one way to build community in their lives, and then let us know. Send us an email. Cassie will drop the email at the end of the episode, and let us know how you built community so that we can share that with the world, because I think that's really special.
Yeah, especially with this episode we're going to do coming up. We need your help.
All right, I'm going to flip to Cassie now so that I stop talking. Cassie, take us away.
I said, take a hard left turn. Not right, left. You need to find balance for yourself. I think at camp, we find ways to like get involved with the nitty gritty, but then we're out having fun, maybe spreading chaos a little bit as well. Typically right before bedtime, because that's what directors do best. But also ensuring you're taking that time for yourself. So I know I am inherently guilty of this. I am the one who responds to messages on days off or goes and runs errands for work on my days off, but that is not what your days off are for. This is just your vivid reminder. Take that time off for you. If you have paid vacation, use it for you. Don't let your manager be on your case about using your paid time off, right? Find that balance and find it in your workday as well, right? Take those deep breaths, take that 5 minutes, work on that project, time block your days so that you have time to do everything you need so that you aren't working on your days off. And I think at camp, sometimes we're really good at this. And like, I know I was good at shutting off at the end of the day. I'm like, okay, if it's my radio off night, my radio is off and they would have to come bang on my window to wake me up, right? Find ways to make that balance happen for you. It's part of your self-care, but it's also part of being able to exist as a human.
I do like what you said, Cassie. I think it's really important. And I am laughing because I am so bad at this, especially these days in my life. But
it's okay. I'm horrible too.
I think I also want to say, sometimes I hear the phrase, find balance, Rachel, like shut yourself off. And it makes me want to rebel because I hate the idea of being told what to do. Somebody told me the other day, they were like, we like had plans, and they were like, you like should probably actually spend the night at home. Like, we can do this another time. And I was like, excuse me, I'm not 7 years old. Like, don't tell me I need to spend the night at home. And then I slept for 10 hours, and I was like, all right, fine. Maybe you were right. I concede. Should have slept. Great idea. But I think sometimes it's about finding the balance that works for you. And the balance that works for you, Cassie, is going to be different than the balance that works for me.
Yes.
It's going to be different from the next person. And I think that it's really challenging because we talk about this idea of there being perfect balance in our lives. And it's going to look different if you have kids, if you have dogs, if you live alone. Also, depending on what season of your life that you're in. And I think at camp, we often find balance in a way that looks different from the rest of the year, but still works for us.
Mhm.
And I think that we need to figure out what that is. Like, maybe in the season of life that you're in, it's 30% life, 70% work. And you know that, and you can really make incredible value in that 30% of life while work has to take up 70%, because you know that at one point it's going to switch and be 60 life, 40 work, uh, or whatever those percentages may be. And obviously it's never that cut and dry. But I think acknowledging the fact that balance isn't always 50-50 and is different for everyone is important, and would make me hate the phrase self-care less.
Yeah. I love that analogy. Thank you for sharing it. I'm like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think it varies like day to day. Like there might be a day when work is 100% and you don't really have a lot of time for life, but the next day might be, 20% work. Right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely. And it's okay.
acknowledging it.
Well, and it's okay to have days where your work is none, where you're just taking a life day, and that's like a
Mhm.
fabulous thing. So yeah, just understanding that balance is a fluid thing, I think.
Exactly. All right, Rachel, what's next?
All right. So this is our final lesson for this episode. And it's to give others an A+. Start by giving others an A+. And you touched on this a little bit, Cassie. You talked about giving other people trust. And in the show notes, we're going to drop a link to the book, The Art of Possibility. And it's a great book. It's really effective. I highly recommend folks read it. So in terms of giving others an A+, it's the idea that you're starting assuming positive intent in other people. And this includes yourself. Are you starting a new job? Are you starting a new hobby, etc.? Give yourself an A+, because chances are you'll rise to that level. Um, you'll be like, wow, I am going to be a great knitter, let's say. And it's not about perfection in the skill, but is it you're giving yourself an A+ for effort, for attention, for commitment to that project. Versus when you meet somebody and you're like, oh, they're going to be like not great at this, you're automatically giving them a C, and they're going to sit there because you're already biased. It's a way of addressing that unconscious bias. But it also means that when somebody joins, whether it be a project or a hobby, your sports team, you're like, wow, you're going to be great. People want to be great, and they'll work up to that. Are they going to have perfect skills? Well, no, not if you didn't teach them. I mean, if you have somebody join your hockey team and you're like, oh, you're going to be amazing, and then their stick handling skills are not great. I'm showing off my Canadian side, apparently. Um, like, you telling them they're going to be great is not going to improve that physical skill, but you saying, wow, you're going to be great is going to improve their enthusiasm and dedication and commitment to wanting to be better. And it makes us all better. So let's try and live in a world where we can all give each other an A+ to start, and allow people to rise to that. And it also allows people to figure out what they need to get to that point as well.
I love that. I want to start giving more people A+, because I think there's people out there that we work with or that we maybe connect with that we're like, oh, I got to do this. And we go into it with this like less than desirable mindset, and it really affects the outcome of what that is and what that conversation might be or the work that they put in. And I'm going to test it, see if I can change my mindset as well as like create better humans.
Great. Well, maybe there'll be another episode come out of this, Cassie. We can hear all about how you gave people an A+.
Yeah, I'll start reading, actually listening, let's not lie. I'm going to audiobook that. But it is time for us to wrap up. We had some great conversation here about a few more of the lessons you might have forgotten or maybe just needed reminded of that we learn at camp, or maybe sometimes we reflect on them after camp and realize how important it is moving forward. But before we wrap up, we have a recharge station for you today, remembering that self-care is critical to personal wellness in the good times and the hard times. It's also something, as I said earlier, that camp professionals kind of struggle with, but we do it. Thinking about it as recharging your batteries or helping you feel inspired. Or maybe it's a little bit of something else. So Rachel, you have a moment you would like to share with us.
Yeah, I was talking to a good friend of mine, and I've been, full disclosure, living in a season of life where balance has not been key, or has not been a priority for me, unfortunately. And I was commenting that I was tired after a few nights of not a ton of sleep, and she just turned to me and said, "Do better self-care." She had no patience for me anymore. She was like, "I'm just going to call you out on your crap, Rachel." So find a friend who will call you out, and who just tells you what you need to. Um, because it's a beautiful thing to have somebody not have to dance around the bush or dance around the topic and just say, "Do a better job with this." Sometimes you just need to hear it if you're like me, at least.
I think that's helpful. Like if it's sometimes hard to acknowledge when you're not doing enough. And if somebody else is willing to help you with that, please, friends, help your friends. So we want to thank all of you for joining us beyond camp. We hope that you were able to connect and reflect with us as we journey beyond the property lines and bring camp with us. As we wrap up, we want you to be able to reach out and connect with us, so you can connect with myself and Rachel at beyondcamp@gocamp.pro. Please remember to check out our show notes at gocamp.pro/beyondcamp. So you just kind of flip those two things around. And we want to just continue to thank the team at GoCamp Pro for continuing to make space for these conversations, to ACA Illinois for their sponsorship and support of this idea, to our producers, Matt and Jotham, especially for their help in titling episodes recently. We've been dropping the ball. Thank you so much. And to you, our listeners, for continuing to listen. Beyond Camp is part of the GoCamp Pro podcast network. Check out all our other podcasts at gocamp.pro/podcasts. Go well and safely, friends. We'll see you next time.